certainly will not finish this lecture notes, and I don't have these uploaded yet, so I'll try to upload this week. So transition to the Roman Empire. The first part of this is history, and then we'll jump into some content talking about the Roman Republic and government structure, etc. From Alexander to the Caesars. So 358 to 336 is the reign of Philip II of Macedon. Of course, his son, he secured the Grecian mainland at the Battle of Chaeronea, 338. The reign of Alexander is 336 to 323, and we noted a couple weeks ago that it was a short reign for him. He was 33 years old when he died, essentially about 20 years old when he started his advance as an empire. Pretty amazing. Alexander invaded Persia in 334. He defeated Darius III at the Battle of Issus. Besieged Tyre, captured Egypt at 332, which that's quick. Invaded Persia one year, defeated Darius the next year, besieged Egypt the next year, and finally defeated Darius in 331. And then he interacted in campaigns in Persian provinces and invaded India. Finally, he died in 323. He died at 33. He had tirelessly, for himself at least, driven his army to conquer much of the known world. Militarily, he was a genius. He was a flat-out genius. Administratively, he was a disaster. He didn't have a son to leave his kingdom to, or if he did, his son was an infant son. And so his generals essentially claimed parts of his kingdom. And so divided out into 3 or 4 parts. Originally, it was 4 parts, and I think one was subsumed under another to become essentially 3. As Alexander conquered the known world, he spread Greek language and culture. His kingdom didn't last long. The influence of Greek civilization has influenced modern Western culture, and so we see that from his influence and the influence of the Greek language and Hellenization or Hellenized culture, Greek culture. Alexander's empire divided into these blocks: the Macedonian, which is Macedonian Greece, the Grecian homeland. Ptolemaic, where Ptolemy seized power in Egypt. And this essentially became the most stable regime under Ptolemy. It lasted for the longest period of time. And then you had Seleucid, who controlled the Eastern Mediterranean along with the Middle East. And those are the 3 main blocks that divided up after Alexander's death. Traditionally, and that's kind of where we find ourselves as we look at the Roman Empire. Traditionally, the founding of Rome took place around 753 BC, and this is the story. This isn't historically verified. This is just the way they talk about their beginnings. When Romulus killed his brother Remus and named the city sitting on the 7 hills after himself. The empire will last in some form until the middle of the 15th century AD. We'll talk about those dates probably next week. Key events and dates in Roman history. In 510 BC, you had the expulsion of the last Etruscan king and the establishment of the Republic. If you're going to write something down, note that 510 BC is the establishment of the Roman Republic. Out of curiosity, somebody tell me what else was going on in the world in 500 BC?
Was that the beginning of the philosophical era?
Yeah, you had the beginning of the Greek philosophy with Thales around that time frame. Classical age. Yep. Somebody tell me something else that's going on in the world around 500 BC. What about with the Jewish people? What do you think is going on there? Do you remember?
What was it? 586 was the...
586 was the destruction of Jerusalem by Nebuchadnezzar. So 70 years later would have been what? Remember the prophecy that in 70 years the people, God's people would what? Would return from where?
From Babylon?
Return from exile, yeah. Return from Babylon. And so you have at around 500 or so BC, 510 BC, you have the return of the exiles under Ezra and Nehemiah. You have the rebuilding of the wall. You have the rebuilding of the temple. and you have the last of the prophets with Haggai and with Malachi preaching to the people of Israel the return to exiles about their right interaction with God and the reason for their judgment. So that's going on at the same time. Not important that you remember that. I just want you to know I want you to be able to connect things that are going on in the same time period. But the beginning of the Roman Republic would have been 510 BC. The Romans were sacked by the Gauls in 390 BC. The Samnite Wars and the conquering of Italy, that's essentially where Rome as a capital began to advance across the Italian peninsula and conquer all of Italy during this time frame, the 80 years or so there between 344 and 266 BC. In 264 to 241, you had the First Punic War, which involved the conquest of Sicily, Sardinia, and Corsica. This is the first time that the Roman state, empire state, republic at this point, the Roman Republic had advanced outside of the peninsula. They desired to take over provinces that were outside the actual land of the Italian peninsula. Second Punic War is 218 to 201, and that Punic War was fought with Hannibal, or with not Hannibal, Carthage. Hannibal was the general. In 216, you had Rome's defeat at Cannae by Hannibal. Think about this: 70,000 Roman troops were defeated by Hannibal's 30,000 troops. Only 2,000 Roman troops remained in that battle. Those 2,000 troops became the impetus for the invention of the Roman legions. Think about that for just a second. In one battle, Rome lost how many men?
68,000.
68,000.
Wow.
Imagine if they had media back then.
Wow.
Somebody's going to lose their job. I mean, think about that. That is a lot of people. A lot of people. 200 to 194 BC, you had the Second Macedonian War and Rome's interest in Greece. And by the way, Greece at this point, because it was a divided empire, wasn't a very strong empire at all. So you didn't have a whole lot of resistance, and so as Rome spread across to the Grecian peninsula, there was fighting and there was war, but nothing like they had experienced with Hannibal and with Carthage, which they eventually won, and they won by attrition. Rome was just flat able to raise up more troops, and eventually they just overwhelmed Carthage. They were able to supply more men than Carthage was, and so they were able to spread their empire, or the Republic, which would eventually become the empire. 149, the final Punic War and the ultimate defeat of Carthage occurred then. The next century brought the expansion of the empire, brought fighting within the nation as well as political maneuvering within the nation. In 135 BC, you had the murders of Tiberius Gracchus and Gaius Gracchus. They were politicians, and so they were murdered for their particular viewpoints on certain unpopular issues. The political assassinations were going on during that time. In 112 BC, you had Marius elected consul for the beginning of 5 terms. And in 49 BC, you have Julius Caesar marched into Rome and effectively installed himself as dictator. Now, the interesting thing about Marius is the way Roman consuls were elected. And in your textbook, and I don't have my textbook, I think it's page, let me see your textbook, Steve. Have I? Okay, 82, page 82 in your textbook, the diagram 5.1. During the era of the Republic, you have the Senate, and out of the Senate came 2 consuls. The consuls essentially served as what we would understand to be the executive branch of the government. They were like a president would function, but they were basically above the law. They came out of the Senate. They led the armies. They did that for a term of 1 year, and there were 2 of them. There were a few reasons they did that. They did that for a term of 1 year. Reason number one why they did that for a term of 1 year is because they couldn't consolidate power beyond that. It was kind of like a check and balance system. Also, the reason there were two is so that there would be some type of competition. So again, there wouldn't be one person who could consolidate power. Because essentially a consul could do whatever they wanted to do. For example, Devin, we elect you and Kevin consul. I don't know if you like each other. I don't know if you hate each other. But
I don't like him.
we could elect you consul. Well, if you didn't like him, you could kill his family and pretty much be above the law.
Wow.
The problem was if you didn't kill all of his family, one of Kevin's nephews could be elected consul in 3 years, and he could take revenge on Kevin's family by killing your family. So a consul being above the law, the way that was protected, and it protected against anarchy, was that it was 1 year terms, and somebody else could come along and institute a revenge policy, essentially, if that makes sense. What was unique is that when Marius was elected consul at the beginning of 5 terms because he was a good leader, it was essentially a rejection of what they would have considered their constitutional republic. So he was a good leader that paved the way for the emperors of the future. Didn't mean that happened then, but it paved the way for the emperors of the future to be considered, okay, we've got somebody who's good, he's in charge, we like him there, and so he's going to establish his leadership. It wasn't tremendously problematic with Marius, but it set a foundation, set the groundwork for the political maneuvering that would eventually happen with Caesar and other emperors. Yes?
I must have been wrong remembering, but I thought there were 3 consuls active, and I thought that Caesar, did his thing to take over from the other 2.
Generals.
Yeah, was that
There were
it?
other generals. Well, Caesar was a consul along with another consul, and he didn't become an emperor technically, but he overran the other consul and became a dictator. Practically, it was a dictatorship of Julius Caesar here, but it didn't last very long, only about 5 years, because he was assassinated, which is what happens when you put yourself in power by military force. Somebody else is going to come in and take you out of power by military force, or by a coup, or by assassination, which is what happened with Caesar. Eventually, it became an emperorship. Octavian received the title of Augustus, and he used the terminology, the restoration of the Republic, which essentially was the beginning of the empire. He was also deified as a god after his death in 14 BC, same manner of Julius Caesar. And it wasn't too hard, when an emperor is deified as a god after their death, it wasn't too long before emperors took the title of god during their lifetime. And that's essentially what happened. Following Octavian, Rome essentially came under the rule of dictators and emperors. Over the next 350 years, Rome experienced times of prosperity as well as catastrophes and disasters. And there was also a time of prosperity and peace that essentially began around the time of the Republic essentially ending with an emperorship in 27 BC. And ironically, that peacetime was, what's 200 years following 27 BC? When does that end? If you do your math correctly. 170 what?
Is that right?
In 170 AD. AD 170. What happened in that 200 years period of time?
Christ.
Yeah. Jesus came to earth. He lived his life on earth. He was crucified. He was resurrected, and the church spread the gospel. Why do you think peace would have been important in the Roman Empire during that era of world history?
In order to be able to spread the gospel.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, if Rome's fighting with cities on that Asia Minor, in Asia Minor, the gospel takes second fiddle because you're not even sure whether you can get in and out. It's like, why is peace important in the Middle East for us as Christians? Well, I mean, sometimes persecution and war can provide reason for us to share the gospel. But when you're trying to protect someone's life, it takes a secondary role. I think God ordained and designed the Roman Empire to establish a time of peace at the perfect time in history for him to send his son.
Mm.
And we'll look at that in more detail in the coming weeks. But I think God did that. Mike?
Rome put Jesus on the cross to snuff out Christianity, to stop his message from doing whatever it was going to do, and at the same time they were building the roads that would spread the gospel.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And Roman roads were another vital aspect in evangelism. And it wasn't technically Rome that put him on the cross. The Pilate was under Roman authority. It was the Jewish religious leaders that begged him to do it. But yeah, they didn't. They were concerned about there being local peace. They thought if Jesus went to the cross, there would be local peace. Interestingly enough, Jesus went to the cross so there could be universal, forever peace. It's kind of a fascinating irony in terms of world history. Okay, we'll take a break there. We'll come back next week and finish up our lecture on the Roman